He wasn't born with a map in his hand. He was born on the edge of England, in a world where the sea killed more men than war, and Spain controlled almost every route worth sailing. Francis Drake did not begin as a legend. He began as a boy watching waves break against the Devon shore, standing in a country that felt small while staring at an empire that felt impossibly large. And somewhere in that space between small and enormous, he made a decision he never took back. He would cross it. Not with diplomacy, not with letters, but with a ship, a compass, and a willingness to sail into places no English flag had ever survived. He grew up in Devon, in Western England. Not in palaces, not among nobles, but in a family of modest means, surrounded by men who believed a single truth. If you wanted a bigger life, you went to sea. The sea was work. The sea was danger. The sea was possibility. As a teenager, Drake learned the basics the same way all real sailors do, by failing, correcting, and trying again. He learned how to read the swell before the wind changed, how to guess distance by the shape of the horizon, how to hear a ship's warnings in the cracking of its timbers. He didn't learn by memorizing. He learned by absorbing. And by his early 20s, he was already sailing far beyond England, first as a crewman, then as a rising officer. Those early voyages taught him something he carried for the rest of his life. The ocean doesn't care who you are. It only cares if you know what you're doing. But before he became England's nightmare for Spain, he was part of something darker, the early English slave trade. He sailed with his cousin John Hawkins to West Africa, captured people born free, and carried them across the Atlantic as cargo. That, too, is part of the truth. History doesn't hand us pure heroes. It hands us human beings, men with brilliance in one hand and brutality in the other. Drake's transformation wasn't born from morality. It was born from survival. In 1568, Drake and Hawkins entered the Gulf of Mexico with a small fleet, trying to force trade with the Spanish in the New World. Spain saw them as pirates. At San Juan de Ulua, near Morda in Veracruz, Spanish forces attacked under a flag of truce. Cannon fire, explosions in the harbor, ships burning, English sailors drowning or cut down in the chaos. Most of the English ships were destroyed. Drake escaped with his life, but something inside him had changed forever. He returned to England with two things: a hatred of Spanish power carved deep under his skin, and a belief that Spain's empire wasn't invincible. It had simply never been hit properly. From that point on, he stopped thinking like a merchant. He started thinking like a weapon. The English crown, especially Elizabeth I, saw potential in that kind of mind. Officially, Drake was a sea captain. Unofficially, he was something far more dangerous: a privateer, a man carrying a royal letter that said, essentially, if you attack our enemies and bring us their gold, we will not call you a criminal. Spain called him a pirate. England called him our man in their nightmares. Throughout the 1570s, Drake began raiding Spanish shipping across the Caribbean. He struck ports, captured treasure ships, learned convoy patterns, and mapped the weaknesses of an empire that looked solid from afar but creaked when touched up close. He wasn't just stealing, he was collecting intelligence, the kind a future empire would be built upon. And in 1577, he received an order that would define his name forever: sail west, into oceans Spain believed they owned, and return the long way round. In simple terms, circled the world. The voyage didn't begin with glory. It began with 5 ships, roughly 160 men, and almost no chance of rescue if anything went wrong. Once past the Atlantic, Drake pushed his small fleet south along South America, into waters where storms aren't weather. Their punishment? At the Strait of Magellan, the narrow gateway between the Atlantic and Pacific, storms shredded his fleet. One ship turned back, one vanished, one was destroyed. Drake pressed on with only the Pelican, which he later renamed the Golden Hind. On the other side of the strait, he discovered a truth no English sailor had ever seen firsthand. The Pacific, Spain's private ocean, was barely defended. Spanish ships were heavy with silver, rich with goods from Peru, and absolutely confident that no English enemy could reach them there. Drake broke that illusion. He struck ports at dawn, captured treasure ships, and seized maps, charts, and trained pilots. Then, he vanished into the open ocean before Spanish forces could even react. His most famous capture was the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, a treasure galleon nicknamed Cacafugo. She carried more treasure than Drake's men believed a single ship could hold. Silver bars, gold, fine luxuries, jewels that felt unreal in the hand. Drake loaded the Golden Hind until the ship groaned under the weight. This wasn't just wealth. This was a message. Spain's empire had nerves, and nerves could be struck. But taking the treasure was only half the mission. Surviving the return was the other. Drake knew sailing back the way he came meant passing Spanish outposts, furious from humiliation. So he chose the more daring option: return west, across the entire Pacific. For months, the Golden Hind crossed open water without charts, without radio, without any guarantee the world existed beyond the horizon. They reached the Philippines, then the Spice Islands, then the Indian Ocean. They sailed past the Cape of Good Hope, where storms eat ships whole. They returned to the Atlantic like a vessel from another world. And in 1580, nearly 3 years after departure, the Golden Hind sailed back into England. Only a fraction of the original crew survived, but they had done the impossible. Francis Drake became the first English captain to circumnavigate the earth and return with his ship and its treasure intact. Elizabeth knighted him aboard his own ship. Spain demanded justice. Elizabeth ignored them. If that voyage made him a legend, what came next made him a nightmare. In 1587, with tensions rising toward war, Drake sailed directly into the fortified Spanish harbor of Cadiz, one of the nerve centers of the Spanish fleet. He burned ships, destroyed supplies, and delayed the Armada's invasion plans by months. He called it singeing the King of Spain's beard. It was more than that. It was psychological warfare. No harbor was safe. No empire was untouchable. When the Spanish Armada finally sailed in 1588, a massive fleet meant to crush England, Drake was there. Legend says he was calmly playing bowls when the warning beacons lit the hills. Whether the quote is real doesn't matter. The attitude was, in battle, Drake used speed, long-range guns, and relentless harassment to fracture the Armada's tight formation. Fireships, night attacks, constant pressure. Storms finished the job. The Armada never landed. But the sea gives, and eventually, the sea takes back. In his final years, Drake tried to repeat his earlier victories, but he faced stronger defenses, harsher climates, and the weight of time. In 1596, off the coast of Panama, Francis Drake, the terror of the Spanish Main, the admired navigator, the first Englishman to circle the earth, died of dysentery. No heroic duel, no dramatic battle, just the quiet truth that even legends are mortal. His crew placed him in a lead-lined coffin and slipped him into the sea he had spent his life mastering. Not a cathedral, not a monument, the ocean. So who was he? A brilliant navigator, a daring strategist, a captain who stayed cold in danger, but also a raider, a man shaped by violence, a man whose ambition carved the path for a future empire, for good and for ill. He was heroic and dangerous, visionary and ruthless, an adventurer and a weapon. He was, in short, exactly what his era required, a man who looked at Spain's golden map of the world and said, "No, we can sail there too." A man who understood that empires look invincible until someone tests the right fault lines. Francis Drake lived his life on that boundary, between courage and ambition, between exploration and destruction. He didn't see himself as a legend. He saw himself as a captain doing his job in a world where the horizon never stopped moving. Strip away the myths, the songs, the Spanish prayers whispered at his name, and you left with something simple. A man who kept sailing into places everyone else swore belonged to someone else and refused to turn back. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe for more.